Intelligence was doing aeronautical analysis from the German technology that they brought back from World War II, from the Russians, that these objects obviously were not coming from Russia, nor were they coming from the stash of old aircraft and the Horton brothers and things in Germany at the time. So they could only come to one conclusion. They're not ours, they're not theirs, they're from somewhere else. And this kind of put a big kibosh on the military careers of many of the people at T2 Intelligence at Wright Field.
According to the story, all the copies of the estimate of the situation were destroyed, but that couldn't have been true because, as a matter of fact, we have several people who said they saw one, including Captain Ruppelt himself and the Pentagon's major person at the so-called UFO desk in 1952, Major Dewey Fournet.
They said that it was interplanetary and that it is intelligently controlled and interplanetary. Fournet, who saw the whole document, said, listen, these guys were trying to shake the tree up in Washington. This was a preliminary thing, and he said he didn't see that he read the report, he didn't see that they had the evidence to make this conclusion. But it's an estimate of the situation. 10 minutes after you write, I worked in intelligence. 10 minutes after you write an estimate of the situation, it's stale.
The first major UFO proponent was a retired Marine Corps major named Donald Kehoe. Kehoe worked in the Pentagon. He had once been an aide to Colonel Charles Lindbergh. He had all kinds of contacts. He was a popular writer. He wrote stories, adventure stories in pulp magazines, usually with an aviation theme.
He also wrote fiction stories about World War I flying. And I read those things every time they came out. 10 cents a copy, little pulp magazines, beautiful things.
So when True magazine, which was a very popular men's magazine back years and years ago, decided that it wanted to look into the question of what flying saucers were, it thought, well, Don Kehoe is a good guy. He's got all these Pentagon contacts. He knows about aviation, knows a lot of pilots, and many pilots are reporting UFOs. So he spent about 8 months investigating the story for True magazine, and the article that he published in the January 1950 issue of True was titled, "The Flying Saucers Are Real."
And Donald Kehoe became probably the most important person in the history of UFOs. That article, which came at the very end of the year, was sort of a psychological bomb for many people because it seemed to expose a hypocrisy in Air Force intelligence, and not only that, seemed to rather clearly point to the extraterrestrial hypothesis.
When he was making a discussion with me, and he was essentially telling me, that I was not doing the right thing to the job. And I told him that, well, in a way, it's your fault. Because if you hadn't written those stories and gotten me so interested in the Air Force, I wouldn't be here.
Did they make you want to be a pilot or something?
Yes, it did.
Kehoe concluded from interviewing his Air Force contacts, interviewing pilots, other credible witnesses, that flying saucers were coming to Earth probably from Mars. That sounds rather ridiculous today, but in those days, even many reputable scientists thought it was at least possible that Mars harbored an intelligent civilization. This was before the space probes and other advances told us that this was not possible. But at the time, it was considered a reasonable speculation that Mars was inhabited. Kehoe thought they were peaceful. They were coming here with good intentions, but they were afraid of us because we had sent our interceptor aircraft after them. And so they were shy about establishing contact. But they were watching us, and they'd started watching us intensely because they began monitoring our atomic bombs. This was a version of the extraterrestrial hypothesis for the UFO age. In 1957, he assumed directorship of an organization called the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, which brought together all kinds of people with solid professional and middle-class credentials to argue for interplanetary visitation, to lobby for congressional hearings. NICAP began as a hugely ambitious operation, but the funding that Kehoe had counted on did not materialize. That's an interesting story in itself. But in the late 1950s, up until the later 1960s, Kehoe and NICAP represented respectable pro-UFO opinion. And this was at a time when, although there was a great deal of skepticism, the idea that UFOs could be real, even extraterrestrial, was not quite the marginalized idea that it would become in later years.
I think that scientists at the time, despite the interest that was there in possible life in outer space and the knowledge of astronomy and what was possible in terms of solar systems and chemistry in the galaxy, scientists basically had literally no conception that aliens could potentially visit here.
You trust the big paradigm maker at the time. And the big paradigm maker at the time is Einstein, and by gum, you don't go against Einstein. He told you this. He put the 10-pound finger on you. You cannot go faster than the speed of light.
Special relativity and the speed of light, how much impact did that have in scientists' ability to take a look?
I think in considering the possibility of, let's say, ET visitation or even ourselves going out and exploring other stars in the future, even though general relativity had come along and it actually changed that picture, most scientists with an instant response would think on special relativity terms and say, well, the velocity of light is a limitation. You can't go faster than the speed of light. And therefore, to conceive of us exploring stars or other people coming here, it's too far. They just can't get from here to there. We might explore our own solar system, but that's probably as far as we're going to get. But the truth of the matter is that in general relativity, that's not the case. There are options there. And in fact, one of my favorite examples was when Carl Sagan was putting together his book and movie Contact. He wanted to have some kind of more or less instant connection to faraway locales. And so he approached Kip Thorne at Caltech, who was a friend of his, and says, I want this to be as scientifically reasonable as possible. And so Kip decided to look into the possibility out of general relativity that you could beat the speed of light. Well, it turns out that in general relativity, we can begin to talk about manipulating the space-time variables, which was not the case in special relativity. And then, in fact, you could, say, make wormholes, which is sort of be like subways through space or whatever. So he came back and told Carl, no, you can incorporate that. But he got sufficiently interested as a theoretical physicist Kip did, that he began having his graduate students look into these more bizarre outcomes, predictions from general relativity. And so, in fact, they came up with ways that you could beat the speed of light with the so-called wormhole shortcuts through space-time. But of course, now that's become a very legitimate area of general relativity research. And so there's a lot of work going on looking at wormholes, so-called warp drives. In the end, it may turn out that wormholes, there's a possibility of engineering them, and people are still looking at that, at least the principles of it. Warp drive is, as far as we can see, is going to be tough. Well, here we are at the beginning of the 21st century, and so we know there's going to be a 24th and a 28th and a 30th century science. And the scientists of those years are going to look back and see how primitive we were. So really a scientist, if he's up to it, can't rule out anything.
I have several editions of an astronomy textbook out, and I talk about this limit of the speed of light, and I put a footnote in there saying something like, at least according to our current understanding of physics. And I got a moderately irate letter from some scientist, this is outrageous that you would put this in. And I thought, well, how outrageous for him. Is he really on record that our physics of 1987 or whenever this was is the last word? I mean, it doesn't mean you should start assuming things can go fast in light, but you just shouldn't assume that we know everything. And as Arthur Clarke said, any superior intelligence is going to look like magic to us. Exactly. Anything that violates our crude understanding of the universe that we have.
We have to assume that our understanding of the universe
Sure we do, yeah. And you have to be ready for the thing that's out there that violates it.
I'm always reminded back in the late 1890s how the head of the British Academy of Science said, "We know it all, we're just wrapping up the details."
And there's who was it Haldane or one of the famous British scientists, the space flight is utter bilge, is a famous line.
I mean, I love Planck's phrase, which can be paraphrased. That is, how does science go forward? And he says, funeral by funeral.
So I really don't think it was only light speed. Again, it was more sociological, psychological, and philosophical reasoning that led scientists to reject UFO sightings. Now, there's another one there too. This is a corollary to the if we don't know it, if we don't aren't aware of it, it can't be true. We the scientists will not use data that comes from the public, that comes from the great unwashed. And of course, physicists and astronomers, well, at least the physicists don't ever do this, or chemists. Astronomers do a little bit with amateur astronomers, but other scientists don't, and they're just not used to saying, well, we could be getting some valuable evidence from people who are out there.
One of the themes that comes out in the early history of ufology was that the UFOs weren't actually there for investigation, but the people who reported them were. And this is what led to a whole group of psychological kinds of interpretations, and then they were essentially negative ones. The person's stupid, they're lying, they're drunk, they don't know what they're talking about, they're crazy. And then you let off the hook, right? There's no real challenge to science. There's no real challenge to what you currently believe, because it's this person's problem, something wrong with them. So we don't have to rethink things like interstellar travel, interdimensionality, whatever, might or might not be out there.
There was a terrific example of this that's in my chapter in there, and it was a Russian spacecraft satellite called Zond 4, I think it was. And that was a big rocket booster, and that re-entered over the United States, came in through the atmosphere, as we know from modern films and the disastrous shuttle breakup and things like that. These things come in, start to glow, they get hot from friction with the atmosphere, they start to break up just like a meteorite or a fireball, and you get a string of fragments. And I've actually seen one of these. I saw one of the shuttle tanks re-enter over Hawaii once, and it's amazing, it's remarkable. It's like a big mass of fireworks. The one I saw, they were all kind of sparkling, and they're moving across the sky together, because there's like the big piece out in front and some smaller pieces behind. And they're slowly spreading out, but what you see moving across the sky is that string of lights together. And we could say that's the perception in this case. Now, I was given on the Condon Commission a folder of what I remember as something like 150 or 200 reports of this. And one of the strangest things I experienced there was that in general, the people who knew what they were looking at, the people who said, gee, that must be a satellite re-entering the atmosphere and breaking up, they gave the shortest and crispest reports. I saw this bright thing, some lights in the sky, I think maybe it was a satellite breaking up. It's kind of the end of the story. The people who most badly misconceived it, they conceived that they saw something else, gave the most elaborate and detailed reports. And some great examples of that. There were even a progression of stages. There were the people who, as I say, the people who said, oh, this is satellite, end of story. Then there were the people who were describing what they saw, and they said, I saw a string of lights in a kind of in a line moving across the sky. Well, that's basically absolutely accurate. Great example of the perception correctly reported as a conception, and so on. Then there were people who started introducing a very subtle difference. There were people who said, I saw a set of lights flying in formation across the sky. A little bit of a different idea there.
Yeah.
It's the idea that somehow they're under control. I just was re-looking at that chapter that I wrote, and I noticed there was a person who said they were flying in perfect military formation. Now, if you know what he saw, that's not a bad description. But on the other hand, if you come in and you're talking to this guy the next day and he says, I saw these things flying in military formation, you think, well, were these really a bunch of different craft flying along in military formation? That's not what he saw, but that's his conception. Right. And then finally, we get to this end, as I say, with the detailed descriptions. There were people who said, I saw a black cigar-shaped object with a row of lights. And of course, they didn't see the black cigar-shaped object. They conceived that it had to be there, because there had to be something for those lights to be attached to. Then there were the people who said, I saw a black cigar-shaped object with a row of lighted windows. And we absolutely had reports like that. And then the last two or three that were the furthest off, I saw the cigar-shaped object, the windows, it was so close we could have seen people inside the windows if there had been anybody in there. My dog was barking and whimpering, and there were fires in the fields outside of town the next day, and all of that. And you come in as either an experienced and maybe an inexperienced UFO investigator, looking for reports of alien craft. Those sound like pretty good reports, and so they're all the same thing, and they were all a satellite breaking up in the atmosphere. So really tough to translate those into real understanding.
As proof of the extraterrestrial hypothesis remained elusive, some ufologists began to look in other directions. And some of the more Fortean-inclined ufologists, the ones who were attracted to the idea that UFOs were part of a broad range of anomalies and mysteries, speculation grew that there weren't extraterrestrial visitors, that these were actually paranormal entities.
This is around what year, Drew?
In the 1960s, about the mid-1960s, the idea begins to form that UFOs really aren't what they appear to be. They may not even be craft, they may not even represent a technology in the ordinarily understood sense of those words, that these were actually shape-shifting entities from some unknown other world, a parallel universe, a demonic realm, something like that. And there was an attempt to link flying saucers not only with other weird phenomena that people reported, like strange creatures and so on, but also to traditional folkloric entities like fairies and angels and demons, which were also interpreted as not literal entities, but as representations of kind of cultural expectations about supernatural experience. These things existed in some sense. The experiences of them were real, but excuse me.
Okay, no problem.
But they weren't what they appeared to be. That they really were something else, representing some kind of unknown other reality. The most influential writers in this new school were Jacques Vallée and John Keel. In 1969, Jacques Vallée wrote a book called Passport to Magonia, where he links modern UFOs to traditional beliefs about fairies, demons, gods, entities of various kinds.
At the time Passport to Magonia was published, it was looked on more as an ancient astronaut type text rather than a real subversion of the whole extraterrestrial hypothesis. Most people read it and said, well, okay, the aliens must have been around from time immemorial. This is just more evidence for the same. But in fact, what Vallée was saying was something quite different, was that UFOs are just a part of some larger mystery.
John Keel, who was much less intellectually sophisticated, but just as influential as Vallée, wrote several books in which he revived traditional demonology. And he argued that UFOs and their entities and all kinds of other strange creatures were literally demonic entities. He didn't say they were from hell, but he called he renamed hell the superspectrum. The superspectrum was also related to the traditional occult idea of the etheric realm, a realm on another level of vibrational frequency.
It did sort of mesh with the spirit of the times. The idea of getting away from technology, scientists and government as the good guys, which, you see in all those 1950s monster outer space movies. The heroes are always scientists and soldiers. Complete revolution there. They become the villains. And the counterculture, the notion of a new age, belief in a more spiritual sort of thing becomes very popular. So this idea of Vallee is that there might be some kind of mysterious force in almost a Star Wars sense.
The control mechanism.
Yeah, is out there and is responsible for many manifestations of the paranormal. That quickly caught on.
Now, to critics, this was really an abdication of reason, logic, and science, that this was really a reversion to magical thinking and a rejection of science and reason as the right tools with which to investigate phenomena. But the absence of conclusive proof for these, extraordinary phenomena was very frustrating to a lot of people. And some people had come to this less as scientists than as mystery mongers. They weren't really hard, clear thinkers. Vallee was trained as a scientist. Vallee was trained as an astrophysicist. Vallee was intellectually sophisticated and not as inclined to rank paranoia as Keel and his followers were, but still underlying his reading of what was going on was really magical thinking that really had as much to do with traditional occultism as with science. Out of the paranormal school of ufological theory, there evolved the so-called psychosocial hypothesis, which actually rejected paranormal processes, but did see UFO reports and experiences as part of a broad range of folkloric, supernatural phenomena. But instead of ascribing them to demons or parallel universes or some other unknowable place, held them to be psychological phenomena, sometimes extraordinary psychological phenomena. This school really grew among European ufologists, and to this day is fairly popular in Europe, representing a kind of skeptical ufology, which is making its own variety of extraordinary claims.
They tend very much to look for answers in what you might call tradition. The idea that that certain ideas have been passed along. They want to find cultural antecedents. Here's the same imagery as abductions. We can find it in science fiction. We can find it in stories of fairy kidnap. You can find it in all sorts of cultural predecessors. That doesn't mean that there's some kind of organizing force. It just means that it has something to do with the way we think and believe. And there's really no mysterious unknown phenomenon involved.
Critics of paranormal and psychosocial approaches to UFO theory pointed out that there is a body of physical evidence for the presence of something anomalous that seems irreducible, that doesn't seem amenable to prosaic explanation or to being contained within known knowledge at this stage. And so they would respond to psychosocial theorists and paranormalists as saying, this isn't all just airy-fairy stuff. This isn't all subjective. There actually is some objective evidence that something strange is going on. And the paranormalists and the psychosocial skeptics could never really adequately rebut this argument. And eventually, some ufologists who had gone over to the paranormal or psychosocial side said, yes, the physical evidence is really the core evidence. It really is at the core of the controversy.
It's amazing how quickly galaxies have formed. The Hubble Space Telescope did a couple of very deep surveys, very long exposures, to look for the most distant clusters and individual galaxies, and found that galaxies formed sometime around the first billion-year age of the universe. And so that means the stars, of course, which constitute galaxies, have been around that long. So a civilization could be rather old. You have to assume, of course, that evolution took place, and that takes some time. But certainly civilizations at least 1 billion years older than ours are theoretically possible, maybe even much older than that.
The first one generation of stars has to go by, I think 4 to 5 billion years for heavy
Well,
elements.
it depends. I mean, the very heaviest stars evolve pretty quickly. They evolve in time scales of even less than 1 billion years.
Oh.
So it's possible that there could be civilizations that are very, very old.
What would the limit you think be?
Well, just say 10 billion years. That'd be about twice as old as the.
A civilization could be 10 billion years, or?
Well, I suppose so. I mean, if a civilization evolved during the first, say, 4 billion years of existence of the universe, then that's not out of the question. More conservative say it's easy to imagine a civilization at least 1 billion years older than we are. Leave it at that. 10 billion, well, it's kind of stretching it, but it's not out of the question in my view.
The universe is really old compared to our age. Not super old, because you can imagine one 1 trillion years old, and we're not nearly close to that, but it's pretty old. And what that means is, and particularly with recent astronomical discoveries, is that in fact the average civilization in the galaxy, how can I even speak of that? Because just pick the average age of a planet like Earth. In other words, in a solar system, what would be the average age of a solar system, or like a sun-like solar system? The answer is 1 billion years older than ours. So when you start imagining what 1 billion-year-old civilization would be like, the answer is, I can't imagine it. So I can imagine almost anything, including, yes, the Earth is just a place to come and enjoy the local natives and or what have you. But it really means that almost anything is possible, to be honest. So I find it difficult. But my mind does begin to reel, actually, when I think about billion-year civilizations.
Well, so a lot of people will say something like, what would a technology be like that's 1 billion years in advance of us? I say, hey, I don't need 1 billion years. Give me 1,000 years. And if you don't think that would be kind of amazing, just think back 1,000 years and hand some guy living in the 11th century a light bulb, let alone a generator or a nuclear power plant.
I have an answer.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that may have been left out of the famous Drake equation about trying to estimate what fraction of solar systems have planets, what fraction of those planets have life, blah, 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 is that technical civilizations may only last 1,000 years or 10,000 years. That I don't know. I'm not sure we can be that optimistic about our own culture, what we're seeing.
It's true. We may replace
and whether we get off the Earth and get out there before we use up all the resources. I mean, we may only have one shot at doing that. So it may be that the fraction of cultures that are around long enough to be interested is small. Plus, then there's the evolutionary window that you're only a species for 10 billion years, 10 million years. That's kind of the turnover time for evolution. So the idea that cultures, once they achieve space travel, remain interested in everybody else, seems small to me. I don't think that's probably likely.
I guess the point is simply that Fermi's paradox is a bigger paradox now than it was 50, 60 years ago when Fermi first made his famous quip. So we've got to face up to it, and I think that the problem is that the scientific community is unwilling to consider the possibility that in this giant morass, which is the field of UFO reports, that there might be lurking some really valid signal. It's just a mindset that can't be, and I think that's actually to the detriment of science.
I and Bernie Hayes, Bruce Maccabee, Jim Deardorff put together a paper for the Journal of the British Interplanetary Society, which is a very well-respected journal, and first covered we began with Fermi's paradox, famous claimed expression by Fermi, which did take place when he said, well, all astrophysicists looking out at all those stars and all those galaxies know that unless we want to really be pumped up with hubris, there's got to be other ET civilizations out there. Furthermore, if you look at the statistics of travel, even if you're very conservative and say you can't beat the speed of light, and each time you go to a new star, you stay there for 1,000,000 years before you go off to look at another star, nonetheless, you end up saying the galaxy should be colonized by now. Because after all, we're a relatively young star. We're less than 4 billion years old. We've got stars in our galaxy 10 billion years old. That's plenty of time for us to be colonized, so where are they? And the answer at the time, this is back in, 40s, 50s, was, well, probably speed of light limitation. So looking at that, we said, okay, well, that limitation now has begun to evaporate due to the new understandings and predictions coming out of general relativity. So that's not the issue. Well, what about what Condon said in his report? Well, that's not really an issue either, because we now have better data, better sightings, more evidence. So it finally came down to, at least in that paper, we talked about a couple of cases that Bruce Maccabee had been directly involved in investigating that seemed pretty good. And then you finally get to the issue of, well, if that's the case, then why don't we see the evidence? Well, you can claim that UFO sightings are possibly evidence, but of course that hasn't met the scientific standard of really being proven. And then the question is, well, if they're kind of here but they're not showing themselves, why is that? One possibility is that if you're a super advanced race, you've got super advanced technology, what's of value to you? You don't need slaves, you don't need minerals out of the ground, you don't need this, you don't need that. You can basically make whatever you want. So the only thing of value would be the intellectual property and creativity of an uncontaminated species. Uncontaminated. Uncontaminated being the key. So they show up here and say, whoa, internal combustion machine, who would have thought of that? Or look at those musical scales. Now that's really something. And but the minute they land and we shake their hands, 100 years were them, and we've lost our value. And also, as we know from interacting with primitive societies, the shock can disrupt the society. Presumably they would know that too. So what Deardorff likes to point out is that, okay, they're not going to make themselves immediately known for obvious reasons, because it would destroy our value to them. On the other hand, and it would be a shock. And on the other hand, they know it's only a matter of time, even if it's only when we get our own spaceships, go out there and run into them. So we do have to kind of be brought along in our maturity to accept this as a possibility. And so kind of a covert peekaboo process would be the favored one. And, that could be the case. Obviously, we don't know for sure.
There's almost nothing I can think of good that would come from landing and making contact with another civilization that is not either comparable to yours in development or is so sophisticated that they can handle it. And when you think about the scenarios we can all dream of, science fiction, about contacting, in other words, we're the aliens and we have this ability to travel, we develop this technology, we start flying around the galaxy, we encounter another civilization that's less advanced than us, would we land? And the answer is, I certainly would not.
I certainly wouldn't.
Yeah. And I won't go through the long list of bad things that can happen, but it is a long list. And so it, by the way, raises the question of when could contact even occur. When you think about it that way, and you realize that despite all the science fiction stuff, in fact, I think that societies would pull back from contact and not do it. When does it happen, actually? And that, to me, is the more profound question. And I don't have an answer to that.
There is an awful lot of assuming that they would be like us, and I tend to fall into that trap frequently.
Pretty hard.
And it's very hard not to do it. It may be, of course, that if the extraterrestrial intelligence was sufficiently different from us, we would not recognize it. We would not know it was there. We couldn't make sense of it, and possibly vice versa.
Yeah.
But certainly we don't know how technology is going to progress. Right now, it seems to be accelerating, going very, very fast. Will it level off? Will it taper? Will there be various plateaus? But the differentness of extraterrestrial intelligence is something that has to be taken into account when we think about the possibilities of contact and if contact is going to occur. And, we might not notice it. I mean, sad but true.
Well, there could be good reasons why they don't say hello. It could be that they're trying to keep our civilization from suddenly imploding because we're encountering something that's beyond our ability to assimilate. It could be that this is part of the plan to bring a new civilization into the fold, to gradually expose the phenomenon. I think that there are a lot of reasons why they wouldn't just come and land here if they so chose.
Our own experience with South Pacific civilizations encountering European technology, in the 19th century, should answer the question. I mean, those civilizations were practically destroyed.
Well, in fact, it's true. When we encountered ourselves more primitive civilizations, we tended to destroy them. But it may be even more severe than that. I mean, we don't tend to try to initiate contact with a group of ants, do we? We don't know how far advanced a civilization might be. I'd be surprised if we were tens of thousands, but certainly decades or even centuries I would see as a possible timescale for making contact known. If you look at UFO reports, they're oftentimes extremely convincing to the people who see them, who witness them, but the event never lasts long enough, never has enough exposure to sort of rise to the surface of national attention. And it could be that is part of a deliberate strategy. I mean, that could be one way to gradually make us collectively as a civilization realize that there's more to reality than what we experience every day around us, but without suddenly upsetting the whole apple cart, without suddenly sort of challenging all of our structures and our politics and our economics, which could be very devastating.
Here's another thought. Maybe it's already taking place. Maybe that, flying around or whatever in a kind of liminal way, right at the margins of our reality, is in fact the first step towards a contact. That contact would not be something which would be abrupt, but maybe is designed to take place over thousands of years, so that the impact on us is...
Yeah, this is actually how, if I were in charge, how I would manage contact. And this is sort of getting back to this idea of the dawning realization that, if everyone reaches the same conclusion at once, it would be very exciting. If slowly more and more people are drawn into one position or the other, and then finally there's just a very small group of holdouts that maintain a contrary view. Why, in the case of something like contact, if we're talking about civilizations billions of years older than us, what would be the rush? In modern North America, we're always in a rush. We wouldn't think of building a cathedral, say, over a period of 800 years, as was done in medieval times, give or take a few years. But if something were truly momentous, then indeed it could take place very, very slowly over many people's lifetimes. And what this would mean, if it were to take place over many people's lifetimes, is that there would always be a growing group of people who quote, think something's going on, with a lot of other people who still don't agree with them. But why would there be a rush requirement in something as delicate and portentous, you might say, is contacting another civilization?
Well, this becomes more just trite, which is that you're ready for it. I mean, you're really ready for it, meaning that you are at such a level that it will not affect your social mores, it will not affect your technological underpinnings, because in fact, the best way for aliens to completely screw us up is to land here and say, here's the box for free energy, go use it. And all of a sudden, everything here just falls apart. Why there have to be gasoline stations? Oh, gee, all those people just lost their jobs. And why? I mean, you just go on and on and on, and it just the whole place becomes a nightmare of, So, so you have to have a society that can handle this contact, whatever that means. And I can just conceive of it in my 21st century, small human mind here, which I don't think is big enough necessarily to get our arms around it. But I do think we're a long way away from it. But what would be the appropriate moment for contact? And so that's another reason why I'm pessimistic. I used about scientists. I think I'm realistic about whether or not we can expect contact. And my realism says no, actually.
It's an interesting set of challenges. I personally am not as worried about these sort of fierce, destructive aliens as a lot of people are, because I think what we're finding out through political science is that there are a lot of forces that tend to put really aggressive societies out of business. And it's not a popular message when I talk to people who've read the morning paper. It's less popular now with what's going on in the Mideast, but there's a lot of growing evidence within political science on the kinds of conditions that lead to peaceful coexistence and why they're likely to prevail. And what I have to do as a psychologist is, if I'm trying to imagine what ET might be like, is while being aware of the problem of anthropocentrism and anthropomorphism and so forth, is to try to say, okay, now what's out there that seems to be pretty robust? What is there out there that we have learned that applies in different historical epochs, that cuts across cultures and may cut across species? And those are the things that I see as fairly useful hypotheses, to try to follow up.
Such as?
Interstellar tit for tat or negotiation. That if in fact you find a communicative civilization, and if in fact there is a way to communicate in a time frame that's meaningful, what you do is you indicate an interest in collaboration and getting along, sharing information and so forth. But you don't just sort of give it all away at once. You wait for some sort of reciprocal concession. It's known as the golden rule. It's known as tit for tat. There's a number of other names for it. It appears in science. It appears in biology. It appears in social science. It appears in religion. And given the universality of reciprocal relationships, that's one way to start thinking about bargaining or interacting with ET.
Before this happened to me, I had no idea anything like this could happen. I was awakened by a presence. Then I began to see these faces, and I wasn't quite sure what was going on. There was a long, needle. They said they were going to put this into my head, and it scared me to death.
started to live in denial that it was even happening. I said, I want to see. I looked up and they started to lift me towards this just enormous craft. It was terrifying. And they're doing something to me. It's not something that's in my head at all. It's real, it's happening.
Before the fall of 1985, I had no opinion about UFOs or alien abductions or anything like that. I probably would have scoffed, actually, at anyone who said they'd been abducted by aliens. At the time of my first encounter, we had a country house, very isolated. The property butted up against a large state-owned area of 15,000 acres of forest. And it wasn't actually even on any maps at that time. The private road hadn't been included in maps. We had nothing like satellite photos in those days. So we were just kind of off the grid.
It's great, honey. I love it.
Can I?
Yes.
We had enjoyed a lovely Christmas at our cabin. We'd had a wonderful time.
Hey, the weather report says it's gonna snow tomorrow.
Hooray!
Just as traditionally as you can. And it was just a lovely time.
Sure.
Every night, I went from door to door and window to window, making sure everything was locked. Having lived in the city, I felt very isolated when I was out in that house. And I began to obsess about there being someone coming into the house at night when we were asleep. I would do that more than once, actually, in a night. I would wake up in the middle of the night and do it again. And I was filled with fear. I did not know really why. There was absolutely nothing suggesting anything unusual. But on some level, I knew damn well something was wrong. I was awakened by a whooshing sound. And I heard it. I sat up. Maybe it crossed my mind that it might be the dishwasher. I'd had an alarm system installed in the house, so I was confident that no one could get in. As I woke up, I became immediately aware of a presence. Before I could do or say a thing, I was gone, I was blacked out. After the blackout, something happened to my body. I didn't feel anything. I could feel my core being, my inner self, but there was nothing happening on the surface. I was like paralyzed and I had lost sensation. Then I remember a feeling like going up in a fast elevator. And I saw the trees whipping past beside me. It happened so fast, I didn't get a chance to gather myself together. And I blacked out again. That's how it started. I found myself waking up. I couldn't move. And these figures began to dart around, and I wasn't quite sure what was going on. Then I began to see these faces, big, long, narrow faces with big black eyes, but they were short. It opened the box, and there was a long, like, needle thing in the box. They said that they were going to put this into my head, and it scared me to death. It was devastating. After they inserted the needle into my head, then the really unpleasant part physically began. They inserted something into me. I blacked out. I woke up in the morning, confused. I felt like I'd been in a fight or something. I thought, this can't be true. This is absolutely ridiculous. But it was so vivid. By the time I went to the doctor, I had reconstructed the experience enough to tell him the sequence of events. And he laughed and he said, Whitley, you're telling me you were taken aboard a flying saucer by little men. And I thought, my God, I am telling him that. What in the hell could that mean? And he examined me and he said, to be honest with you, Whitley, it looks as if you've been raped. In the weeks following this experience, I was very unstrung. I began to fear that something might happen to my family. I fought with my wife, and I tried to get her to go and live somewhere else with my son where they would be safe from them.
Can I turn on TV?
No. We're still having supper right now.
But we're not talking.
Then concentrate on eating your food.
I think I was probably quite short with him at times during that period. I was very concerned about them both.
Maybe we should take a trip to the city. Just get out of here for a while.
At first, when the memories began to return, I just couldn't believe them. I thought that I had been drugged by somebody or been hypnotized and had this experience implanted in my mind. I did not want to believe I'd been abducted by aliens. I also had done some research by then and found out that there was a lot of UFO activity in the area. In fact, there was, across the Hudson, there was a whole huge flap of the Hudson River Valley UFO sightings, which was still just in the process of ending when this happened to me. And that was only 30 miles away, 30, 40 miles away. My brother had given me for Christmas a book called Science and the UFOs. In it, I found a description of something that was very similar to what happened to me, and I was shocked. But I still was just scoffing at the idea of alien abduction, because at that point, anything but what might have really happened was what I wanted to grasp on. I wanted it to be something I could understand and handle, but I couldn't stop thinking, what if it's real?
I want you to focus on my pencil.
I was obsessed with continuing because I wanted answers badly.
Barely keep them open.
And my life just blew up in my face.
Stop it, please, stop it.
I had a close encounter of the third kind, for sake. When I began exploring how to understand what had happened to me, the possibility of hypnosis became apparent.
I've never been hypnotized before. I don't know if it'll work on me.
Well, let me worry about that. Even under hypnosis, no one's going to make you say anything that you don't want to. Okay? You're the one who's in control. Okay?
Okay.
All right. I want you to focus on my pencil. And while I do this, I want you to relax. All right. Relax your face. Relax your neck and shoulders. And now I want you to relax your eyes. You can barely keep them open.
When I went into hypnosis, what I saw was so vivid and so unexpected.
Something went past the window.
Something went past the window?
Something big. Someone else is in the room. Who the hell is that? Is that somebody there? It can't be. I don't want to be there. I don't want to be there. Oh, God, stop it, please. Stop it. Don't let me take me there. Stop!
It's okay, Whitley. Look, you're safe. Okay?
And that was why I was so paranoid and unstrung during the October-November period. But I had no conscious memory of it until it burst unexpectedly out in that hypnosis session. What I saw was so vivid and so unexpected to both of us that I basically think there's no way it wasn't a production of memory, not of imagination.
Do you want to stop?
No.
I was obsessed with continuing because I wanted answers badly. I had a close encounter of the third kind. For sake, I can't just ignore this.
Okay. Now it's the night of October 4th. You've just woken up. And tell me what you see.
Under hypnosis, I saw one of these alien figures standing in my bedroom. It touched my head with a wand that had an electric fizzle to it. And it flashed terrifying visions. The first one I remember is a vision of my son. Something is happening to him. And I had the impression he was dying or being kidnapped or something at the time, and it was very frightening. The second vision was a vision of my father dying. He died previously of a heart attack. He was already dead. And the sense of sadness I felt was profound. I loved him deeply. There was a third vision involved, an apocalyptic vision, the end of the world, and of everything being destroyed, either in a nuclear war or a natural catastrophe of some kind that looked like a war. I remember the sense of despair and helplessness that it brought me.
I've got to decide how I feel about this. I can't deny it anymore.
When I began to gather myself together, I had met by this time other people who had had similar experiences. I began to ask myself, what did they want from me? I speculated about whether or not what seemed like a psychic attack could have been warnings. I have remembered more and more, not only the vision of the apocalypse, but other warnings and consistent warnings, not only to me, but across the whole community of people who have had this experience, a lot of them get the same warnings that we're in trouble, that our environment is in trouble. So I'm not alone in that. And that has become a really central feature of my current life. In March of 1986, I had what was a seminal moment of change for me in this experience.
Oh, God.
After it became clear to them that I was trying to engage with them, they began to respond in various ways. It was the most extraordinary experience I've ever had.
I remember seeing a bright blue light come under the door. I said, okay, let's do it. I just want to get to the bottom of this. I had no idea what I was in for.
In March of 1986, I had what was a seminal moment of change for me in this experience. The sensation I felt when I tried to move on that night was like I was being impeded by something that really slowed you down, like a thick tar or something. When they are there, you have a feeling that is almost impossible to describe. I was terrified, but I sort of forced a grin onto my face and tried to smile. I couldn't smile very well. I wanted to try to show them that I was not dangerous, that I was something that I wanted to know more. And there was a change then. After it became clear to them that I was trying to engage with them, they began to respond in various ways. They were trying to build a bridge, I think. I think that was the first moment when there was any kind of real exchange. I wouldn't say that, oh, this is definitely aliens. I would say that it was real and that we don't know what it was. That I am quite certain of. The public reaction to my book Communion was very complex. Literally, as soon as the book was published, letters that week, literally the week of publication, letters started coming.
You got more letters.
We had well over 200,000 letters over the years. We probably had closer to 500,000 over the years.
I don't know what to say to them anymore. I don't have all the answers.
Maybe just understanding the questions is enough.
After I began to read them, I realized there's something happening on planet Earth that we do not acknowledge. We don't know what it is. Is it aliens? Is it something to do with us and something about the way we are that we don't yet understand? I don't know, but it's real. In the late summer of 1994, it became clear that we were running out of money. We began to not be able to pay our mortgage, and it became clear we had to leave. And so, at the same time, though, that this was happening, I was having one of the peak experiences of the whole thing. I'd begun meditating in the cabin because people had found the place, and there were other people out in the woods at night looking for the aliens with flashing flashlights up in the air and such. childish stuff. And so I meditated, and I stayed in the house and meditated from then on. I didn't really want to be disturbed by that. And one night there were these thuds on the roof right above me. And the next moment I could feel a presence in the room. At this point, these years later, I was easy with their presence in the house. I wasn't scared of that. And I finally said, I want to see you as you really are. And I didn't see anything. And so I said, well, this is it. I'm leaving this room now, and I'm leaving it forever. I will never return to it, because tomorrow we leave, and we're leaving forever. And I left the room. I went to bed. I lay in the bed, still hoping something would happen. Suddenly I saw a light light up in the front yard. It was a bright, beautiful white light shining on the grass like moonlight, but 10 times brighter. I got up and looked out the window, and this light with rays coming out of it, and the rays penetrated my body, some of them, and I could like taste his presence in the rays. It was the most extraordinarily beautiful experience I've ever had. The next morning, we left the cabin, and the experiences have never been like that since then. People who don't have open minds and are dismissive of all of this miss out on one of the most wonderful, frightening, dangerous, beautiful things that you can know. I did not ask for this. I did not know about it. I did not expect it. I did not want it, that's for sure. But it burst into my life without warning, and it's never left me since.
Take from this what you will. This does happen to me. It has been happening to me all my life, and you don't have to believe, because I know the truth. My earliest memories of being abducted by aliens were when I was very young, 5, 6 years old. I was living in Ohio, and it was kind of in the middle of nowhere. Our nearest neighbor was a mile or two away. There was, nothing for miles. I would be in my bed, usually. I would hear voices coming down the hallway. The voices were of my parents, so I got comfortable thinking it was my parents. I remember seeing a bright blue light come under the door, and shadows, actually, of something standing outside the door. And I realized that it was not my parents coming in. When they got close, I'd see those black almond-shaped eyes just staring right at me. Emotionless eyes just looking at me. And they would extend their hand, and I would grab it as if I was really comfortable with them and had done this many times before. And they often would let me take my favorite stuffed animal with me. As a child, I didn't realize that these beings didn't visit everybody at night. I thought when people went to bed, the bald men would come for everybody, and it was just a normal thing. I decided I would, draw them and write down things that I could remember. I was always into art, so I really started to try to draw them as best as I could.
Hey, sweetie. Hi, Mom. What are you drawing? The bald men.
What bald men?
They're my friends. They come visit me at night.
It didn't start to get uncomfortable until I started talking about the bald men to other people, whether it be classmates or family members, and they just said that it's not real, there's no such thing, you're just dreaming. It was very frustrating being told that this wasn't happening when I knew it was.
Okay, Audrey, I need you to relax.
As an adult, I would remember bits and pieces. I remember them coming in. I remember them doing something to me so I couldn't move. I remember them bringing me somewhere else and being other places. But the things I didn't remember were, what were they doing to me when they took me? And I said, okay, I need to find people that could maybe help me.
Close your eyes. Take a deep breath.
Regression was a great tool to bring back the missing pieces, the memories.
We're gonna focus on a room.
Didn't even think about it, didn't get educated on it, said, okay, I'm gonna get hypnotized, let's do it. I just wanna get to the bottom of this.
It's a basement. You're gonna walk down the stairs.
And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, this isn't gonna work. Those memories are gone. I'm never gonna remember what's happening. I didn't know anything about it. I had no idea what I was in for.
3, 2, 1. Audrey, tell me what you see. Tell me what you see. What you see.
My first hypnosis session was the most traumatic experience that I think I've ever had in my life. I wasn't ready, I think, to see what they were doing. I wasn't ready to accept it. The bald men were just terrifying to look at. The people that wanted to help me, they did this wonderful hypnosis session. They got all this, detailed accounts of what's going on, and this was great stuff. But I never came back for a long time. I just left. I didn't want to think about it. They gave me a copy of the tape. I never listened to it to this day. I try to forget. And I just ran from it for a long time. I started to live in denial that it was even happening until they came for me. I was just getting ready to go to bed. My window was open, and all of a sudden I started hearing the shade flapping. And so I was sitting there, and I had the feeling that they were coming. I call it the heebie-jeebies. I get it. And it's like a pure state of panic, anxiety, but at the same time, almost like I feel like I'm magnetically attracting something to me. I can't explain it, but it is some kind of attraction. I got under the covers like I had as a child for so many years, thinking that would help. And I don't know, something kind of snapped inside me, and I said, I want to see what's coming and what has been coming for me for so long. So I didn't hide under my covers this time. And as I sat there waiting, after the wind came the lights and the humming sound. I woke up at a time I wasn't supposed to wake up. As I grabbed him, I heard, "Watch out for the mother." Once the light came into my window, I knew that it wouldn't be long. I started to feel a twitching in my body and my arms moving by themselves, like muscle spasms almost. And then buzzing sound, it's real steady. It was a kind of fear I can't even explain. Total confusion, anger, what are they doing? And then, of course, why? Why? I tried to scream so somebody could hear me and maybe help me, and I couldn't. There was no sound that would come out. For some reason, I started to say, I'm gonna fight this. I'm not letting them take me. As I grabbed him, I heard in my head, watch out for the mother. And then I let go. I felt something stick me, and it was a burning sensation instantly, to a point where if I moved any muscle, it was like my whole body was on fire. It's weird because they kind of position you the way they want, almost like they can do it with their mind. Once you can't move, they can move you. So as I was levitated off the bed, and I could feel myself moving straight ahead, and I knew straight ahead my dresser was there with a mirror, and it's backed up against the wall. I realized that I was going right through it, and I could see my feet go right through the mirror. I realized that I'm outside, and it was really, really bright. I looked up, and I saw the ship lights. And they started to lift me towards this just enormous craft above my house. It was terrifying, confusing, surreal. Like, this can't be happening to me. And I went close to the ship. And that was the last thing I remember. And then I just blacked out. All of a sudden, I was awake and aware. I noticed a man walking around me, and I looked at him, and he looked at me. He felt familiar to me for some reason. He touched me and was no longer a man. At this point, I asked it, and when I say asked, it's completely telepathic. And you somehow know who it's coming from, and even if there's a group of them. Finally, I asked, after all these years, why are you doing this to me? And he said that they were working on altering my DNA. When he was talking to me, he actually cared. And that was a feeling that was really confusing because, of course, if you care, why do you abuse me? If you care, why are you doing this? But then I got to ask him, and he said what he was doing. This was like a breakthrough. I got to talk to him, and it's been years. It's almost like that first question that I got to ask was just the beginning. There was a machine. It was strange looking, but I knew it was some kind of a clock. And it was counting backwards. I heard the words war, and then just blacked out completely. And that's all I remember until, I woke up at some point. I don't know how long it was, but I regained consciousness. I'm still on the table. And they're doing something to me. They had a machine that actually physically came and removed my eye. And when they pulled the eye out, I noticed that there was something coming to where my eye had been into the socket. This big, long needle, they put it into the eye socket, did something. The next thing I recall after seeing my eye getting removed was just being back in my room. The whole time I'm coming out of whatever they do to me, I would remember bits and pieces. I scrambled to my journal and I wrote down what I remembered. I don't usually even look at my journal because it does tend to bring back a lot of the fear and the emotions And, you know, sometimes it's meant to be forgotten for good reason. Years later, I started to have physical problems from it and actually had to, you know, undergo various surgeries because of unexplained scarring in my tubes and ovaries and uterus. There was just, you know, the doctors didn't know what it was from. There's just scarring in there. I never told the doctors what I knew it was from. It's not something that you can say, all right, hey doc, you know, this is what's going on, especially back then. I had this time in my life where it just kept happening and happening and happening, and it really picked up for a couple years. This encounter started as it always does. When I woke up, there was one of the Greys standing at the foot of my bed, and I saw him there, and then just blacked out completely. As I wake up this time after I blacked out, I was in a strange place. I realized that I was in a cocoon surrounded in gel. I started to panic. One of the Greys realized I was awake, hurried over to me,